Okay, so I'm also going to go through this exercise in Affinity just while you're making your decisions about which program you want to use for this class. It's really similar to Illustrator. It's better in some ways, it's worse in other ways. The main thing to consider is that Affinity is free to use, but it is not the industry standard. It will be a little more similar to the Adobe products than Figma will, but that means there's a few extra options in here and a little more clutter to deal with. But it does give you more options than Figma will. Okay, so let's get started. So the first one here, making a square. So just like every other tool, we have our shapes to work with. I'm going to use the rectangle. I'm going to hold shift, which will constrain my aspect ratio to scale this proportionally. And there's my square. Similar to the circle, or similar to the square, the circle is over here underneath the shapes. You can see this gives me sort of some smart guides to line this up. If I hold shift, it scales it proportionally. And if I hold control or command, if you're using a Mac, it changes the location that this scales from. So if I hold control, it scales from the center, which makes that scale nicely. But then you can also see we want to make this a solid stroke with no fill. So to remove this, I can use that. So now there's no stroke, no fill. I need to add back in a fill. So I'll make this a solid red. And then if I wanted to change the weight of this, I could do so over here. And to pan, I'm just holding the space bar, but you can also use your middle mouse button. A triangle with a dashed stroke. I have a triangle tool here. I'm going to do the same thing I did with my circle, and I'm going to hold shift and control. And then I'm going to switch back to my move tool, and I'm just going to scale this down a little bit to make it an equilateral triangle. To change the type of stroke that this is, I need to come over here to my stroke settings, which is this little wavy line. And then the style of stroke is up here. I can change that to dashed over here, and I can change the weight of that. If I wanted to change the distance of these, I could change these numbers here. So this will be the length of the stroke, and then this will be the length of the gap, and you can create more complex patterns by changing these additional ones here. If I wanted the caps of these to be squared, I could change that here. Rounding a corner of a square. I'm just going to start down here at the lower left-hand corner. I'll show you a shortcut to switch your fill and your stroke. Like here, I just want to quickly make this a solid color instead of a stroke. If I hit Shift and X, it swaps my fill and my stroke. And then if I want to round this corner, I need to use my corner tool. So I grab that. And you see when I hover over this node, I get a little curve. And as I pull and drag, it rounds that corner. Okay, now we're going to get into the fun stuff of building shapes. So this suggests using the Pathfinder to unify these shapes, but I actually really like the Shape Builder tool instead. So when we're thinking about these double diamonds, I first need a square. And then if I think about the easiest way to build this, it would be by rotating that 45 degrees. And then I could make another square, but I actually just want an exact copy of this. So I could use Control C, Control V to copy paste. You can also do that by right clicking, copy paste. But the shortcut that I like to use in Illustrator, Figma, and Affinity is to hold Alt or Option. And then if you click and drag, you get an exact copy of whatever it is that you've clicked on. So I'm holding Alt on my Windows machine, click on this and I drag. I'm going to hold Shift to constrain this to move perfectly vertically. And now I have these two squares. But I actually want these to be one shape. And I'm going to switch the fill and the stroke on these just to make this next part a little bit easier to see. And I'm also going to make these solid so that this is a little less confusing. Okay, so now I want to show you the Shape Builder tool. So if I select both of these by clicking and dragging, you'll see that these are two different shapes. Now, you might have your paint bucket tool over here, but underneath here, if you click and hold, there's a Shape Builder tool. And if I select that, when I hover over my selected shapes, you can see that it's highlighting in this sort of um, line pattern the different areas that it sees that are constrained by solid lines or solid strokes on all sides. And there's a plus next to my arrow. So if I click and drag, if I drag through these, watch what happens if I let go. It will combine those shapes. And then if I do that one, you'll see that it makes this one solid shape. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that to show you the other ways that this can work. So if I hold Alt or Option, you'll see that it is going to cut whatever it is. So if I click there, it removes those parts of this shape. But we do want to add these together. So I'll combine these. You'll see this is now one shape. And then I'm just going to swap the fill and the stroke back. We can use the same logic to build this circle with part of it missing. Okay, I'm going to hold Control and Shift to scale that up. And then if we want to cut part of this out, we need like a cookie cutter shape to cut this with. So I'm going to go ahead and make a, what do I have selected that I don't want selected? Make a square. And I'll change the color of that just so we can see what we're working with. I'm going to bring this to the front just so we can see it. You can either right click, arrange, bring to front. You can see my shortcut is here. Those shortcuts become really handy to quickly move things around. But I'm going to bring that up front so that we can see it. And then I'm going to line it up with the center of this circle, select both, grab my shape builder tool, and just like I was talking about, I'm going to hold Alt this time to cut away from the shape. So now this square is functioning as my sort of cookie cutter to cut that out of the circle. And you'll see we're left with this partial pie shape. Pentagon in Affinity, this does not work while drawing. I'll show you another way to do this. So we have a polygon tool. I can click and drag, and this defaults to 5 corners, but I'll show you how to change that. You'll see the number of sides is up here. I can add or remove sides from this if I wanted to add, let's say, an octagon or something. But this is how you would create a pentagon in Affinity. The star tool, I believe, is also under here. And then you get some other options here to adjust the inner and outer radius, changes how deep those points go. The outer and inner circle curves those inner and outer points. And this is how you would do something like a starburst or something like that. And then maybe I adjust the inner radius out like that. And this is how you can create sort of like a splash effect or something. But there's our star. Overlapping circles filled with the center missing. This is the same logic as our combined shapes. So I'll make one circle. I'm going to hold Alt and click and drag to get my second one. I'll select both, go to my shape builder, and cut out the middle here. And then if I want to combine these, this might not work with the shape builder if I click and drag. Oh, it will. Okay. And then that combines these into one shape. The other way you can do this, let me undo this for a second. If you want to combine or remove things, and sometimes you have more complex things you want to do, is with these Pathfinder options, and add is the one that will combine these. This is one shape now. Quadrilateral with a narrow base. So here we have to do some more sort of shape math to think about what shape do we start with and then how do we refine it to get this more complex shape. So I'm actually going to start with a rectangle, and then we'll take a look at how to move these points inward so that the base is narrower than the top. In Affinity, to move single points, we need to use our node tool, but it's a little different than in Figma or Illustrator, where we can just do that right off the bat. Because we're working with a primitive shape with a rectangle, Affinity actually isn't going to let us adjust these points because a rectangle, it would change that shape. It wouldn't be a rectangle anymore. So we first need to expand this by converting it to curves, is what it's called. And that will tell Affinity that we no longer want this to be a rectangle. We want it to be freeform shape that we can adjust. So when I select this, I can come up here to the top of the toolbar, hit convert to curves. And now you'll see when we have our node tool selected, we can select individual points here. And this will let us take this point, and we can move that in. And the same thing with this point. Now, this won't work if you have your move tool. Your move tool will move the entire shape. But if you have your node tool, you can move individual points on a shape. Okay, some more shape math going on here. So thinking about how we get this petal shape. You could draw this with the pen tool, but the easiest way to do this is with two circles. So just like we had the two circles overlapping with the center missing above, we're actually doing the opposite here where we just want the center. So I'll grab my shape builder, I'll hold Alt or Option, I'll cut off the left half of this, cut off the right half of this, and I'm left with this petal shape. It does give me two, but that's okay. I'm just going to delete one, and then I'm left with this one. Half circle, some more shape math. I'm first going to draw a full circle, and then I'm going to give myself a cookie cutter to cut this with. So if I select these, you'll see I just need to remove the bottom portion of this. Click and drag through that, and I'm left with a half circle. I can do the same thing here with the square and the circle missing. Get my shape builder, cut out the center, and I'm left with this. Now we can do this multiple times to build more and more complex shapes, which is eventually what you're going to do when you are doing like illustration work in a vector program like this. So for this example, I'm going to draw my circle, and then I need these three triangles to cut out here. And I'm just going to change my fill color so that we can tell what we're working with here. Underneath my circle tool, I can find a triangle. Zoom in a little bit. Just want to make sure these are lining up, so I'm really zooming in here. In fact, that's not perfect. There we go. Okay, because I want to make sure these are perfectly centered. That circle's looking odd. I think I accidentally duplicated it. Because I want to make sure these are perfectly centered, I'm actually first going to group these, and then I'm going to use my alignment tools to make sure it's centered up in the circle. So you'll see up here I have this group option when multiple things are selected. When I do that, you'll see in my layers panel, all of these things get put into one sublayer. And then when I select this, the whole object moves. To center this up, I can use my alignment tools, which I can find underneath here in the upper toolbar. And then I want to align these horizontally to the center and then also vertically. And you'll see how this shifts over and down so that these are both perfectly aligned. Now I can use my shape builder, cut out these center pieces, and I'm left with just the circle with the triangle in the center. So those are all of our shapes. The last thing to do here is to show you how to export these, which works a little bit differently in Affinity. So if I want to export an entire artboard or page, as they're called in Affinity, I can use this export option up here. And you'll see that it gives me the different options I might want, different file types. I believe PNG is what is requested for this. Um, and then you hit export. It asks you where you want to save these things. So underneath export, I can either choose my selection, artboard, or the object. I want to export this whole thing as a PDF. Usually PDFs are for print, so I'll select that. See if there's any other advanced options here. It looks like it will put these each on separate pages, which is what I want. And when I open that up, you'll see that all of my work is in this PDF on separate pages. The last thing I want to show is, which you won't need for this exercise, but in the future, you'll need to export multiples if you're working on multiple pages or artboards. And for that, we actually need to use a um, different mode in Affinity. So we can't just export multiple things from up here in the export panel. We actually need to go into our slice layout or slice studio. If you don't have this up here, you can select this drop down here. So turn on slice. I'll switch over to this mode. And then this is giving me options for what I want to export. Because I have two things selected, these are already here. I'm going to go ahead and delete these for now just to show you how this works. So starting in the export layers, I select the things that I want. So let's say I want page 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll see these are selected. I create slices. And then when I move over to my slices tab, I can export these slices. I pick the folder. I guess I'll just give myself a new folder. You'll see that all of those PNGs are there. Okay, so that is kind of the basic rundown of very basic shape building and some of the basic functions in Affinity as they relate back to something like Adobe Illustrator.